I very much believe in SEO practices, but if you're writing only for SEO, then you've already lost the game.
One thing we'll come back to when we're done with the first part of this interview is the thing you said about if you're just writing for SEO, then you've already lost. Before we get to that, let's talk about this community-focused content strategy you led and executed at Webflow.
I decided this year I want this to be all about celebrating and spotlighting the Webflow community and customers and what they can do with Webflow.
We want you to walk us through how you were able to pull that off. On the show today, we have Rease Rios. Rease Rios is currently the Director of Content at Qase. Before becoming the Director of Content at Qase, she was also the Senior Content Marketer at Webflow.
So I'm Rease Rios. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Director of Content at Qase. I've been in marketing and content for probably over 15 years. I started in search engine marketing, so a little bit more like pay-per-click advertising and what used to be called SEO writing, which I would definitely not consider a thing anymore. I very much believe in SEO practices, but if you're writing only for SEO, then you've already lost the game. So that's kind of how I started. I then transitioned into travel writing. I was a travel writer for a while, which then transitioned to working at Animals, where I was a senior content marketing manager for a few years. That's that content marketing agency life. And then I transitioned into being a senior content marketing manager at Webflow, which is a visual design studio. So I was in-house. And from there, I really realized what I wanted to focus on and moved into being director of content at Qase, so I can kind of drive strategy from the beginning.
Wow, very interesting. And one thing we would come back to, like when we're done with the first part of this interview, is the thing you said about if you're just writing for SEO, then you've already lost the game. I think I'm solidly behind you on that. Before we get to that, let's talk about this community-focused content strategy you led and executed at Webflow.
Right. So I'm going to focus on one particular project. I do want to say that there is an entire community team at Webflow. So I certainly was not the person who started community at Webflow. Webflow had a rich community before I worked there. I specifically used this strategy on a project for the 2022 year in review landing page. So I think a lot of people are familiar with companies, particularly in the B2B realm, creating those end of year giant year in review landing pages. This was a regular campaign at Webflow long before I started there. I actually worked on the project in 2021 as well, but it wasn't until 2022 that I really had the opportunity to drive the strategy and change the angle. And I decided this year, I want this to be all about celebrating and spotlighting the Webflow community and customers and what they can do with Webflow. So while there was still some of that standard sections about Webflow over the course of the year, it was really more about what people were doing with Webflow versus what Webflow was doing. So
your unique angle or your unique spin to this particular project was about spotlighting what customers were doing with Web. We want you to walk us through how you were able to pull that off.
Right. So in previous years, the year in review was kind of done just for the sake of doing it. And it was very statistics focused. So a lot of like numbers, just number of sites that were created in Webflow, number of people who signed up for new accounts. It was just a lot of statistics. And I really questioned, is this really doing anything to move us forward, especially because Webflow had already gotten that brand recognition. I think in the beginning, maybe when you were trying to work up that brand recognition and awareness, that was useful. But by the time I was at Webflow was huge in the designer space. They did not need to get their name out there. It was more about showing off the power of the tool itself and the amazing people that were behind it. So I shifted it to instead focus on, some of those standard sections. Sure, we're still going to talk about how many sites are in Webflow. Sure, we're still going to talk about the Series C funding that happened in 2022, all of that news and updates. But it was also going to talk about the amazing sites that people were building with Webflow. And instead of just talking about, this is how many new Webflow University lessons we created, that's just a number. Instead of that, we would say, hey, we created all these new lessons. And this many people earn certifications from watching those lessons. And then instead of just saying, hey, this many people signed up for Webflow, we can say, hey, this many people earned expert certifications and are now Webflow experts. And here's their names, here's their picture, here's their website, and here's some projects that they worked on. So it really took it a step further beyond just saying, hey, this is how many numbers wise, how we're doing numbers wise, and really putting the focus back on the people who use the tool. It did involve a lot of data gathering. So one thing I learned from the previous year is that it takes a long time to get all the information you need for a year in review, especially if you are changing around the sections. If you're not following a template from the previous year, it's going to be involved. I think I had to talk to someone from almost every department in the 600 person plus organization. I put in a lot of data requests, and there were a lot of messages from me asking, is it possible to get this data? Is it possible for us to know what happened here? And just kind of figuring out how is it that we show everybody how to celebrate each other through the accomplishments of people with this tool. The tool is just a way, Webflow was just a tool for people to change their careers, up level what they could do with design and development, and we wanted to put that in the forefront.
Okay, great. So now let's talk about the initiation, because it's very difficult to go into a system that is already working, like you said, Webflow, and be able to see things from a different angle, and pulling the weight behind your own thinking and saying and making executive or your manager, whoever you were reporting to see why you should do things this way. That's usually a very big challenge for content marketers. Like, for instance, if say a client comes to us and we say after the audit, we say, okay, we have to do things this way. It's very difficult to get clients to see why they should do things this way and not this way. Can you please tell us a little bit on how you were able to get buy-in to make managers and every other person working on the project or that assisted you to see the need to move away from just statistics, like you said, and shift the focus to people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that when I did the first year in review in 2021, I was really stuck in the template that was created and the standard that was already there. In 2022, there was a few different things that empowered me. First, it was that it was my second round. I'd already done 1 year in review, so I had that knowledge. Second, we actually did not have a director of content at the time. Webflow was in between directors of content searching for someone else. So I actually didn't have a direct boss at the time. So I had a little bit of that leeway. And I think third, it was really just that I came to the people who were going to be involved with a clear plan, a clear hypothesis, and most importantly, I think the volunteering to own it. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, is that I drove that strategy start to finish and volunteered to be the one that would do it. And when you're the one saying, hey, I'll do all of this work and here's what I think is going to happen, it's a lot easier for people to say, you know what, go ahead and do that experiment.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. When you take responsibility for the work, I guess it makes every other person like feel like see like, okay, collaborating or giving this a thumbs up doesn't add more tasks on their Trello or Asana board. So now let's look at the customers, which are like the shifts that you made. So you were moving this whole thing from, let's not just take a statistics of how Webflow has grown, how much we've raised, how many websites are built with Webflow. Now let's go and look for the people who are actually building these websites and put a face to this year in review, so that of course prospects can visualize things that people using Webflow are achieving. How are we able to recruit like customers, like to and get them to want to share their story? So walk us through how you're able to like recruit customers, get them to want to share their story, and collate that information into a resource that eventually went live.
So that's a really beautiful thing about Webflow, is that Webflow actually already had a built-in community that was really excited to share their own projects. And so something that Webflow had established prior to this is a made in Webflow gallery, that if you submitted your site to that, you also had to opt in to say that, like, anytime you want to be featured in this, you'll be featured on our site. But that means that we can also feature you in blog posts. We can feature you on a year in review site. So we kind of already had that. And I think that just design and development is one of those spaces where people want to be told their stories to be told. It's free publicity for them. A lot of these people are professional designers that are studios or enterprise companies that want more clients. So it's actually a huge win for them to be on Webflow's year in review, spotlighted for something amazing that they did. So I didn't really have any problem getting buy-in from the customers. For sourcing it, it was a little bit more intentional because there are big names in the Webflow space. There are agencies that everybody knows. There are creators that everybody knows that if you're in that space, you would recognize their names.
Yeah.
I wanted to strike a balance of finding those champions of Webflow that everybody knows that I knew would also champion the year in review site, but also seeking out those smaller creators that really needed and deserved that recognition. So I was really intentional about making sure that we had multiple countries represented. We made sure that there was a really good balance of like genders and non-binary and different cultures represented. We had multilingual sites represented. That was really important to me because Webflow is a very global tool, and I didn't want everything to be based off of just because you're already popular. If you're already popular, you don't need the shout out. I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure that some of those smaller things. So I had certain criteria for things like, have they been mentioned before? Have we ever done a case study on them? And if they did, then they were kind of moved out of the spotlight because they already had it. And it was more about making room for those smaller creators. I also worked with some other people at Webflow to do some tweets where we would put out tweets and ask people to shout out other people in the community, and we would share what other people were saying about each other. So it was really encouraging the community to celebrate each other leading up to the page so that it would feel even more celebratory when the page came out.
Well, interesting. Like I love how you're able to like create that balance because of course, like you rightly said, the big players, whether you spotlight them or not, of course, their own use was that they could help to champion the year in review and get more eyes to it. But at the same time, it was important to feature those smaller players who would like celebrate that and use that to like maybe wear the Webflow shield and go out to war, like preaching the product. So yeah, great insights. Now let's talk about results. Now that you created this shift from okay, no more just statistics, you were able to like prove it that okay, I was on this project last year. We did just statistics, statistics, statistics. This time around, we want to like feature our people, like our customers, and make the world see what they are building with Webflow. In terms of results, when you look at 2021 year in review and 2022 year in review, changing to this content strategy, this community focused content strategy that puts the emphasis on customers, were there tangible results? What were the tangible results you could share? We know that it led to you joining Qase as the director of content. We'll get to that later, but let's look at the company itself. What results like could you share, whatever that is, whether that is numbers or shares and all that?
I'm actually really proud to share these because in the previous years, the year in review was kind of done for the sake of doing it, just because it was established. And so people were really only measuring traffic to the page. And in some years, they were measuring traffic to the careers page when it was more of an employer branding type of initiative. But this was no longer an employer branding initiative. So it was felt silly to me to only track those things. So I set three new goals. The number one goal was to just simply increase page traffic year over year by at least 15%. So I had the established 2021 numbers to base that off of. My second goal was to create a template for informing the community members that they had been featured. So that was a huge part of my strategy, making sure that every single person that was featured in the year in review was told and knew about that celebration and was congratulated for it. And then my third goal was to measure more than just that traffic. So I can kind of walk through each of those goals. First off, it was the goal to increase the year over year traffic by at least 15%. In the end, in the first week, we blew that goal out of the water with over 50% increase. Over the
Wow.
course of a month, the year over year increase was over 100%. So huge, huge change. My second goal was to create that template to send to community members to let them know they were featured. I also included suggested social copy for different platforms so that if they wanted to be able to just quick copy paste that onto their own platform to share that they had been featured, it would be there for them. All of those emails were sent out on launch day so that they would get it the same day that the year in review went out. And I am positive that that is a major contributor to why we had such a massive increase in week one compared to the previous year. So again, that was over 50% increase. And then the last goal was to go beyond traffic. So traffic is cool, and especially in the design and development world, very cool to just like get shout outs. But what else could we measure? So in addition to traffic, I also worked with a colleague to build a dashboard that tracked signups to Webflow, so new customers to Webflow, plan upgrades, anybody who was an existing customer and decided to upgrade after that. Anyone who opened the Webflow Designer, which was the visual interface to design, that was really cool because we actually had a lot of clonable designs featured that community members had created. And if you clicked on them to clone them, you would automatically open the designer and be directly into the product. So we tracked how often people did that. And then I also tracked if people went to the Webflow blog after that. I can't share exact numbers in all of those, but I can tell you that in all categories, it was over 100% year over year.
Wow. I'm gonna clap for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm gonna clap for you because it's rare to see content marketers who look beyond just traffic. And you know, every day, like we are gonna come to traffic, we're gonna come to SEO and all that. But I think we content marketers, and of course, most of the reasons why most content marketers don't get budgets approved is the fact that when you're always when you start as a content marketer, you increase the traffic, you increase ranking and all that. Initially, executives are happy, hey, we've increased traffic, but I always feel like 6 months or 1 year down the line, if all you're going to be showing them is traffic and it doesn't show up on bottom line metrics, nobody's going to be sponsoring those initiatives. So I like the fact that you ensured that you actually improved the previous year's traffic, but you didn't stop at that. And I want to think that the second thing you did, making it easier for the people that were featured to share the news that they were featured, I think it contributed a lot because that alone exposed you to, of course, millions of people or hundreds of thousands of people that probably wouldn't have reached. So I'm going to clap for you again. Kudos for that. So now let's talk about, so before we now let's segue into how that effort, like championing this whole initiative, designing it, creating the plan, and taking it to people, like people who would have maybe put it down and making them feel like, okay, don't worry, this is the plan, I'm gonna do it. I'm not putting more work on you. It helped you transition to director of content at Qase, and of course, that's a very big career lift. So, like, was it the project itself that got you, like, put you on Qase radar, or you used the project as maybe one of the reasons why you got like this career jump?
I think it was more that this project made me realize what I wanted to do next. I think that being at Webflow was amazing. I loved my team and I loved being a senior content marketing manager because I love to write and I always wanted to stay very much in that writing role. But this was my chance to really set a strategy start to finish and also work with cross collaboration. So again, I didn't build that site by myself. I worked with an incredible design and development team. And I think the most important thing that was part of that was that I made sure that we worked together from the beginning. I came to them with a plan and then we went into Figma and we were working on it together throughout the build so that the entire time it wasn't just like copy's locked, then it goes to design, design is locked, then it goes to development, then dev's locked. I always say lock sections, not disciplines. Like it doesn't make any sense for me to lock copy if I haven't even seen the design yet. It doesn't make any sense for designers to lock design if they haven't talked to developers about what can actually happen. So being able to kind of watch all those moving pieces, see where there were silos, see where things went well, where things didn't go well, really made me realize like, I want to do this all the time. I want to drive strategy start to finish. And I also want to take this community focus and make it core to my job, not just core to this project. I don't want, because the year in review was really kind of a stretch project for me at my job. It was not part of my normal work at Webflow. In fact, we had a totally separate, amazing, talented copywriters. So normally I wouldn't be doing copy at all in that position. It was actually just my stretch project. And I realized, you know what, if I take this to a different company and I actually lead the content team, then I can choose these kind of initiatives all year long. And that's what made me want to do that and then take that community focus and go somewhere that community focus would be beneficial.
Oh, interesting. So like if I'm gonna summarize what Race has just shared for our listeners out there who are trying to advance their career, I think personally what I've learned is that you don't just wake up one day and say, "Hey, I want to be a director of content," or "I want to lead the content marketing team." I think it makes sense to start with a project that will help you test the waters because, like you rightly said, championing this project helped you to identify silos that would typically come between designers and maybe copywriters and trying to understand things from the very big picture. If you didn't take that step and feel very comfortable in your job, you probably wouldn't have identified that, oh, I'm very good at doing something like this, and maybe I could take this, interest and this skill I've acquired running this to go to another company where I can like champion everything and even get to employ people that help me like execute my initiative. If I take that and give to somebody who's listening to this, will I have summarized what you just said, Grace?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a great summary.
All right, great. So let's go over to like other things. So we've gone through the first phase of this show, which is the interview, and I think we've learned a lot. I've personally learned a lot. Let's go over to the next part where we'll just do some rants. And what better place to start than SEO content? You mentioned it,
Yeah.
then you mentioned it directly. So let's just pour out your heart on it.
So I think that this is maybe a weird take for me because I started in SEO, and I think that people who are old school SEO people tend to really hold on to it tightly because it used to be that being an SEO expert was like this badge of honor in the content marketing world. Even really before content marketing was considered a career, SEO was a career. And it was a very specific type of work that you could get really good at because it was all algorithms and systems and patterns. So if you were, I'm really good at recognizing a pattern. So I'm really good at hacking SEO. But the thing is, SEO isn't what it used to be 15 years ago. When I first started doing SEO, you had to write for algorithms because otherwise you simply would not rank. The algorithms weren't smart enough. Now, algorithms are so much smarter than they used to be. You don't have to cater to them, they're smart enough to figure it out. I still think there is value in having an SEO strategy. I absolutely will do keyword targeted articles. I do SEO research on a regular basis. I do worry about SEO metrics, but not to the point where it controls my entire strategy. And it absolutely is not core to my strategy. I think that it's often used as the traffic for the sake of traffic problem, like you were mentioning earlier. People love getting traffic at first. They're like, wow, look at all these numbers. And it looks really great for about 6 months to a year. And then you start thinking, what is all this traffic even getting us? Are we getting new customers? Are we making more money? Or are people just clicking through to one article once and then never hearing about us again? So ranking for the sake of ranking, traffic for the sake of traffic isn't really going to do anything for you. So SEO is only a very small piece of the puzzle that you should be paying attention to in certain companies. I know that there's plenty of companies out there that are doing it completely without SEO, and that works for them and it makes sense. I generally think that anyone who goes too hard on SEO, the people who are worried about keywords density and worried about the formatting to the point of making it a bad reader experience, I think that they're going to lose in the end because you can trick an algorithm for a short amount of time, but you can't trick people for that long.
Yeah, great. In fact, you can't even trick people. You can't even trick people any longer because if I open a content piece and I see, let's say I open a content piece on how to improve your website, and the content starts with, "Do you want to improve your website?" It's almost a red flag. It's almost a red flag for me because that has been used repeatedly, and I think that is trying to align with the idea that hey, you have to put your keyword in the first 100 words or in the first 50 words, and people just if they don't find another way to put the keyword. They just tell you, hey, do you want to improve your site traffic and all that? So now that you've experienced the good in SEO, it's not like SEO is useless. And of course, I'm not going to displace SEO. Now that you're now leading content, what are you doing differently so that your focus is not completely on SEO and you're ensuring that you're balancing organic discovery with the fact that people actually have to read this content and not algorithm just giving content pieces.
Yeah, so at Qase, I am actually really lucky to have two in-house developer advocates. So I have a US-based developer advocate, Jenna, and I have a Europe-based developer advocate, Vitaly. So I have two internal experts that are at my disposal to help with content creation, which is huge for me. So the first thing I did with both of them is I actually created their Qase persona. So we have Jenna at Qase, we have Vitaly at Qase, and they're specific personas that show them how to bring their authentic self to their personality as at work, but also kind of keep it on brand. So when you're representing Qase, what is it that you're interested in? And the beauty about having two different developer advocates is that they have different interests and they have different specialties. So for example, Vitaly is really into psychology of work, sociology, and a little bit more academic thinking, where Jenna loves to coach. Jenna loves to have a hot, kind of like a interesting take, but not argumentative. Jenna loves to help junior testers. And so what I do is I kind of help them find their spot in content, and then I help work with them to come up with topics that they're already excited about. And then I work with them to decide, is this thought leadership? Could we go after a keyword? Is it worth it? Or will that keyword actually just maybe limit you more than it'll help you? Is this an article or is it a different piece of content? So I don't ever consider everything automatically a blog. So sometimes it'll be a LinkedIn post, sometimes it'll be a forum post, sometimes it'll be maybe a quick video snippet. All of those things are possible. And I think that it's just important to use the internal resources that I have. Sometimes those keywords are important. So I think that I also work with freelancers, and I often assign my freelancers the keyword targeted pieces that are more straightforward and informative, things that I don't need to have like a super creative take on. For content that I work with my developer advocates on, I want their personality to shine through, and I also want Qase to shine through. So I think of Qase as a very helpful, knowledgeable, and kind of casual conversational brand, is that we're here to talk to people in the industry. We're excited to just discuss. So we want to start conversations. And I think that a lot of the work that I do at Qase is really just figuring out, how do we start a conversation somewhere?
Interesting. How do we start the conversation? So, like, I think that's a very interesting take to take to that's a very interesting approach when it comes to content marketing, because if if you can nail that, where every content piece you create is focused on getting somebody to read it and enjoy it enough to want to start a conversation, then content can actually contribute to pipeline.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay. So the other thing I want to talk about is community. So now you are at Qase, and you came to Qase with that, feeling like confident in building a community focused or executing a community focused content strategy. What has been the progress in terms of ensuring that, because for most content marketers, it's not like they don't want to feature customers. Sometimes you walk into a company and there is no community existing, because the company has not been taking, ensuring that they could get customers into a special forum where they could keep educating them and all that. So how have you been able to ensure that community focused like content execution?
So a lot of it has to do with making sure that my developer advocates are really present online and in a lot of different spaces. I want them to be wherever our audience is. So I actually curate on a weekly basis what I call interaction opportunities for our developer advocates, and also a few internal champions at Qase. So not necessarily just the internal, the developer advocates, but also Qase champions. And those interaction opportunities work across Reddit, Quora, specific forums like Ministry of Testing, LinkedIn, other social media platforms. And it's all these places where I think that we should be hanging out. And it might be responding to a question on Quora about how to develop your career as a junior tester. It might be adding some information to a collaborative article on LinkedIn because you have that expertise. It might be that you start a conversation on LinkedIn challenging something in the industry. So for example, one of my developer advocates is a agile methodology expert, but he also has a lot of strong feelings about things that are going wrong with that methodology and scrum masters that do it wrong. So I really work with him to challenge those things, post those, start those conversations, and really get in touch with our audience. And part of that is so that our brand is more available because they're always being shown as Jenna at Qase or Vitaly at Qase or Reese at Qase. But it's also because we attend a lot of conferences throughout the year. We sponsor conferences, we give talks at conferences, and particularly for the developer advocates, that visibility is so that it's easier for them to get talks. They're going to be those coveted names. And it already does work a little bit in that sometimes our developer advocates don't have to apply. Sometimes they're invited to do things. And that's kind of the idea, is that we want to create a community for Qase that's, yes, we would love for you to be our customer, but we're also would just love to have a cool conversation with you. We'd also love to share knowledge with you. And that's really in line with kind of the software tester development industry, is that developers are about that knowledge sharing. They want to share their code bases. They want to troubleshoot things together. And by just inserting ourselves into those conversations and making ourselves available, I think that that really builds that brand affinity that we need and that a lot of our competitors lack.
Oh, interesting. Like very, very interesting. So I'm just trying to imagine the level of work that goes into all that, like trying to curate like all these questions from Reddit, Quora, LinkedIn, and then working with your developer advocates to like, how do you do that? I'm asking this question because before with this session, we had I just joined content marketing roundtable where I believe you must know Gail Mary. She
Yeah,
was yeah, yeah,
feels great.
yeah, she was once a very senior person at Animals. She coordinated this roundtable today, and one of the things we talked about on that roundtable was the need to get like to ensure that content is published by experts within the company. So we're talking about how AI-driven content and all that is going to populate the internet with lots of cookie cutter content. And she was mentioning how, she could get into a spreadsheet. I can't really remember the exact details, but a summary of what she was saying is you get into a spreadsheet, you're able to assign different topics, you know, um, highlight who is the best fit to talk about this. And sometimes you could just create that spreadsheet and share with those um, SMEs and say, okay, I have all these topics lined out. Which ones would you like to talk about? And anyone you want to feel comfortable talking about, put in your thoughts on that. So I want to understand because it's so many people were struggling with getting this right, but from the way you've talked, it sounds like you've kind of nailed it or you've made some tremendous progress. So how do you choose these topics? Do you go into Quora? Do you have a tool that consolidates all this information? Then you just maybe open it up and then fetch the ones that you want to cover.
So a couple different things. First of all, the good thing about knowing how to work with algorithms is that you know how to train them. So every time I get a new position, I train my algorithm to that persona. Recent Qase has her, like, I have a whole separate newsletter subscription. I use social media differently on that Chrome browser. I subscribe to different forums. I follow different forums. I am a new person at these jobs because I need to be immersed. For me to really know what's needed, I need to be where my target audience is. So I do spend a lot of time just scrolling through forums and seeing what questions are people asking. I think that's something that people miss a lot with SEO. They'll go after those really like high search volume keywords and completely neglect the long tail questions that lots of people are asking. And SEO tools are just predictions. They're just based off of what already exists and predicting what might exist in the future. So we can't treat them as this one-stop shop of information. Just because some tool tells me that nobody's searching for that, if I'm on Quora or Reddit and 100 people have looked at a question, I'm interested in answering that question for those 100 people. So I do think that it's a good use of my time to be on those things. I help curate it for my developer advocates because I am in tune with their personas because I help them build them. And I went through a whole exercise to build those personas with them. I have my own process where I have a bunch of guiding questions I take them through. I have them share inspirational accounts with me. And then I put together an entire persona that says things like, Jenna at Qase is, and there's a bunch of adjectives, and Jenna at Qase talks about, and there's all the topics that Jenna is passionate about. And then there's voice and tone guidelines, like how do you come off? And that way, by going through that exercise, I'm already aware that I know, for example, that Jenna loves coaching juniors. So if I see a question from a junior that's asking how to build up their career, I'm going to shoot that over to Jenna. Vitaly is really into like, Edward Deming and how he influenced DevOps. So if I see something talking about Deming or some other sociologist or psychologist, I'm going to kick that to Vitaly. So getting to know my internal experts is the first step. As for organization, that is a different beast that I use mostly Notion for. I have a content calendar where I create my assignments. So those are things that I'm assigning to either internal writers or my freelance writers and keeping track of like what's in the works and when it's coming out, kind of creating that balance. And then I have a separate Notion kind of board that I call the pitch board. And it's for anybody at Qase, mostly developer advocates, but also any internal champions that want to work on their persona, want to work on their online presence, and they can pitch ideas to me and I will help workshop them. I will tell them, this is a LinkedIn article, or this is a blog post, or this is a like tweet or whatever it is. And I help them figure out what is the channel for this? Like, is this in line with our brand? Are you the right person to discuss it? And where do we put it? And a lot of that has to do with like personality. So another example is that one of our internal champions, Emily, is a really avid gardener. So I have helped her use gardening as her ongoing analogy to quality assurance. She talks a lot. She already had a lot of that established, but I've kind of helped her use that analogy more cohesively so that it becomes part of her persona. Like you get to be this gardener person at work, but you're also tying it back to what you do at work. Same thing with Vitaly. He's a pet rescuer. He does so much amazing work with all of his animals that he rescues. He calls them his flock. But he does a lot of talking about how like his rescue work teaches him about quality assurance and teaches him about how to do software development. And I think that that's really beautiful to make those human connections because we all are people outside of work. So we can have a professional persona that's also ourselves.
Wow. This is at least this is content marketing 301. Like I'm just listening. Yeah, this has to be content marketing 301. Like I must take these lessons. Like number one, like I know I have experience interviewing internal experts, trying to get their opinion on a topic so that we use that internally and craft content that they will be proud to share. But I have never ever thought of creating personas for internal champion. Like this is the first time I am hearing. So thank you for like leaking that secret to us. And I believe our listeners are gonna take a lot from that. So in case you missed that, I'm gonna re-emphasize. Reese talked about how it's important to get internal, not just know your internal experts, try to know them as a person so that while you're creating topics that they'll probably want to write or add their opinion on, you could, cue that topic to what their personal interests are outside work. Because by doing so, it gives them, it makes them more drawn in and passionate about writing that. And then, secondly, and most importantly, you have as content marketers, you have to go where customers or prospects are. Reese shared example of how she's on LinkedIn. She has different profiles on Quora, on Reddit, trying to see what people are asking and then mapping those questions that people are asking to internal champions within in-house, getting their opinion on them and even guiding them to craft content that she knows will be helpful to that audience. Honestly, I must applaud you for this because, like I said, this is content marketing 301 and I must applaud you for that. Okay, now moving forward, you know, we are drawing a line because I'm the kind of content marketer that always wants to measure things. I always want to find a way to prove that the whatever investment that went into content marketing, there is positive ROI to show for that. Now we've talked about Webflow and the results were obvious. Now it's about a year or so that you've been in Qase and doing all this work, because I know this is heavy work. I can imagine what it means to be scrolling LinkedIn or scrolling, well, even if you've set the alert, I know it's difficult. How have you, like, what has been the fulfillment for you so far in terms of the results, in terms of the conversation that it has started and all that?
So I'll say I've actually only been at Qase for 4 months. So we do have limited results, but I can share the things that I focus on for metrics beyond normal things like traffic and keyword rankings. I'd say from an SEO perspective, I focused on the site health. So how like just making sure that our crawls are going well. And I've gotten our site health up several points since we've gotten here. We're actually at a 98. I checked Ahrefs this morning. I focus a lot on making sure that the current content that we have is good. But I also try to think about, I'm sorry, I kind of lost my track of thought. Can you ask that question again? I just kind of,
So I'm asking, like, okay, 4 months, like, honestly, 4 months. I thought it was about a year. Sorry about that. I know that 4 months is a very short time to start measuring any outcomes. But I'm like, in the direction that things are going, with all these efforts you've put in, creating personas for your developer advocates, getting to know your SMEs to the extent of creating, their personas and mapping questions that prospects will probably have to them and helping them to talk about answer those questions in the context of who what their personality aligns with. What has been some kind of results or conversations that it has started that makes you confident that, okay, I'm on the right track, I'm doing the right thing?
yeah, okay, that's great. So I think a lot of the work that we've done has been on LinkedIn. So I've been able to see the growth of the Qase company page, but actually, perhaps more importantly, the growth of both of my developer advocate pages. So I use their personal accounts a lot. I'm sure a lot of content marketers that dabble in social media are aware that LinkedIn does not want you to leave the platform. It prioritizes personal pages over company pages. So it's really hard to get traction on a company page unless you have really good employee buy-in as well. And it's really tough to get it because most people don't want to go like their company pages stuff. They don't want to interact with the company page. They don't want to reshare it. So part of what I do is make sure that I am talking to the whole company about what we're doing. I share things in public channels. I give them context about why we did it and how we did it. I think one of the most exciting ones that I did was my first article that I worked on Qase was a co-byline with Vitaly. I had not intended to do a co-byline, but we ended up kind of writing it together. And it's a perfect example of my love of SEO thought leadership hybrid. So we wanted to cover the topic of mob programming. Mob programming is a big keyword. It has a lot of search volume, a decent keyword difficulty, very in line with our target audience. But I didn't want to write something that's just what is mob programming. It exists. It's asked and answered 100 times over. Luckily, Vitaly has some really cool insights about how he believes that mob programming practices, which is a collaborative approach to software development, can also be applied to project management and team management. So he and I wrote an article together that did answer the search intent that says like, hey, this is what mob programming is and this is how it works. But then we really took it into a different ed type of direction where it's saying, and all of this works better in project management too. Like you can do better team management if you take a collaborative approach and really explored it. So instead of just doing that boring SEO thing, we really took it and showed off like our thoughts, our opinions, and our style. And by doing that, we were both able to share it on our personal accounts separately. We were both able to get a different audience to respond to us for different reasons. I talked a lot about the content strategy behind it. He talked a lot about the research behind it. And we got a really good response on both sides. Since then, we've also tracked the kind of interaction and followers that my developer advocates have gotten. We also do what I call the qualitative wins. Not everything has to be quantitative. So screenshots of somebody really big reposting your LinkedIn post, something with a lot of followers, or a really good comment, or even shout out saying like, hey, I loved this. All of those things are metrics. Just because you can't say, wow, this is a 15% increase, you can say, 5 different people on LinkedIn said that this was an incredible article. And for 5 different people to say it's an incredible article publicly, that means an exponential amount of people also thought that, but didn't post it. And so that's really, really valuable information that tells me that we're on the right track. People like what we're doing.
Yeah, interesting. Rand Fishkin, he talks about one of the things he talks about that I like is sometimes when you're creating content, you're not just creating content for your target audience, you're creating content for the people who your target audience trusts. So
Yeah.
he talks about this influencer, like creating a persona and mapping some of your content pieces so that your target, like an influencer that your target audience follow and trust is going to love it so much and say, "Oh, my audience this is something that will be valuable to you." And I think that is one of that's a very good win because sometimes when you unpack the customer journey and you realize that when you want to solve a problem, what you normally do is you probably go to Google and search for a company you've learned about. And sometimes you don't even search for the keyword. So looking at content from this angle makes sense because, again, you're not just trying to rank and all that. Ranking is good, but you're trying to ensure that you create content that is usable on mediums where people would read it and feel like it was written for a human being. Now, that last word is where I want to draw into written for human beings. Personally, we are very heavy on storytelling, and when I wanted to start this podcast, when we wanted to start this podcast, I was looking. I said we want a name for this podcast that when people see it, they can see like content is actually a growth tool, not just for businesses but for careers. But
Yeah.
we don't want to start talking about content from the aspect of, oh, I ranked this site and it drove millions of traffic. So when you look at the content that people actually sit down and read, because I take it as a very serious investment that someone like as busy as I am or as busy as you are will take out 15 minutes of your time and sit down and read a content piece from beginning to end. So I keep asking myself, what can I do to write a content piece that a CMO, a CEO, like a director of product would sit down and read? That brings me to the angle of writing content for human beings. And one way we've been able to do it, one way we are always learning, but we are not there yet, and nobody ever gets there. It's the angle of storytelling. So, how have you been able to bring in those stories of, okay, this internal expert is he likes rescuing, like what do you say he likes doing and all that.
He likes to rescue animals. Yeah, he's an animal rescuer.
Rescue animals. Like, how do you bring in those? How have you managed to bring in those genuine stories and segue them into topics that naturally you would have just said, "This is how to do this," and then you put it in your H1, H2s, and not. How have you been able to create that angle where the content feels like it is for a human being?
So one thing I've been working on with anyone that I work with as a writer, freelancer, internal is writing good examples and defining what a good example is. I actually have a piece of content in the works for this. I don't know. That's definitely a side project for me about how to just determine what makes a good example for your audience, because that is very important, and how to write them. So that's something that I've been working on a lot, is that a lot of times what happens with experts is that they don't know how to relate to people who aren't at their level naturally. It's not that they can't do it, but it doesn't come naturally to them. They use too high level of examples, or they get too in the weeds with something. So something that I like to do is make them take a step back and say, okay, explain it to someone who's never done this, or explain it in something that's relatable. So one of the good examples with Vitali, the person who likes to do animal rescuing, is that he also wrote a whole article and did an entire talk, and is actually giving another talk on the practice of dog fooding. So dog fooding is the practice of using your own software. So in that way, when you're using your own software, you're developing it better because you are part of the quality. You're witnessing the quality as you use it. So that obviously has a really good tie with being an animal rescuer. So I think he actually just very recently posted something on LinkedIn that is an adorable video of him milk feeding one of his rescue puppies. And he talks about how he actually has to taste that milk before he gives it to his puppy, because he has to see to make sure that it's tastes good, that it's actually the right temperature, doesn't burn the puppy. And by bringing that, and then he talks about how that's also part of dog fooding and software, is that if you're not using the software, how are you going to know that it's really annoying to try to log in, or like that there's a weird button and the UI is off? So making that connection is something really cool, because it's really natural for Vitali. That doesn't feel like work for him to make that example, but a lot of people would understand it. A lot of people that have nothing to do with software engineering and development would understand why you would test milk before giving it to a puppy. So that's a good example.
Wow, interesting, interesting. So, like you said, not going two steps above or going too much into the weeds so that like you don't lose the reader. Like people, I feel like just imagine you with all your experience in content marketing. You go to a content piece and someone says they want to define what is content marketing. You'll be like skip, 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 skip. Like I've passed, like I've gone past this, but it doesn't mean that somebody cannot write like what is content marketing and you would want to be interested in. Probably that person will say something like what content marketing should be in 2023. Then you'll be like, okay, I know of
Yeah.
content marketing, but what do you think it should be in 2023? And you want to listen and so like I enjoy this conversation and I want to leave a few minutes for you to talk about like go heavy on quiz. Like for our listeners out there, if there's something that Race has tried to mention, maybe as a content marketer listening to this or a CMO, you're not going to be the one to buy Qase. But of course, it's important that your developers are testing what they're releasing to customers. So how do you bring in quiz, into your typical blog? Let's talk about the mock article you wrote. Like, how do you bring in quiz into your content pieces so that it doesn't sound like you're shoving it down people's throats, and at the same time, you're not leaving an opportunity to like introduce the product to engage readers who are enjoying all the stories you're telling and all that.
I think we do a lot of just being really transparent. I think that it's silly to pretend that a company blog isn't going to promote the company's product. But just being honest about it and not trying to be sneaky. So I think that one of the best examples of that is an article we have on our blog that's just like a listicle that's the best test management tools of 2023. I recently refreshed it for SEO reasons, but also because I wanted to make sure it had the most up to date information. But what we do in that is obviously our own product is going to be on that list, but it would be ridiculous for us to just create a listicle that's just a bunch of our competitors and then us saying, like, our competitors are terrible and we're great and you should love us. And I see listicles like that all the time where people they they do clickbaity titles where it'll be like Notion alternative, and then it's just like Notion alternatives, and then it's one alternative, and it's their product, and it's not a very good, helpful article. People are angry because they're just looking for actual information. So what our listicle does is it is not opinion based. It is based completely off of customer reviews on G2 and Capterra. So yes, we put ourselves on there and we acknowledge, of course we're on here, but we also have a fantastic rating on G2. And here's what people say about us. Here are actual reviews and here are actual pros and cons that people say. And then we also list our competitors and we list their scores and actual things. Do we, of course, say like highlight any comments that say like, hey, this is what somebody said about our tool over this one? Of course. But we've already acknowledged that we're going to do that. It's not disingenuous because it's not our opinion. It's somebody else's. We just use that customer created, that user generated content to inform it. And it makes us more transparent. And I'm working on more content like that with our internal experts because that's really our strength here is that our product was actually built by a developer. Our CEO made the product because he needed the product. He was frustrated with what was out there and he built it. So we have that kind of internal expertise already. And so by just being honest about it and saying, hey, of course we think we're the best. Everyone thinks they're the best, but we don't need to convince you. Customers can convince you. Just take it from them.
Wow, very interesting. Like very, very interesting. So, like, at what point do you create that context? For me, like when I'm doing this kind of pieces, like in the introduction of my pieces, like and for every piece, especially all those most of those how-to kind of content or listicles where you have to include your company. And then one of the things I do is I'll say, hey, this article is going to teach you how to do XYZ. And as you proceed, I'll show you how to maybe do it easier and all that with our own product or the product I'm writing with. So very important. One thing you've said that is very important is, of course, people are not stupid. They're not going to come to a blog post you wrote and expect them to come and because it's business. You're trying to help them so that they can help the business. So it's important to just set the context straight and say, hey, this article is going to mention our product. Maybe not just say this article will mention our product. You say this article will show you how to solve the problem that the article will address with our product. So for every content marketer listening there and you're trying to do product-led content, because this is product-led content, just ensure you set the record straight, so that when it gets to the point where you start showing your product, the reader doesn't feel like, well, I wasn't told. just shove this thing down my throat. So very interesting thing. So we've talked about storytelling, we've talked about how you make the content product led, and it's been a very fun conversation. I hope I can do this again. But if there's something I can take away from our conversation today, is the fact that I should start building internal champion, especially for any company we work with, because I seriously haven't thought about this way. I've asked internal experts for questions, but I have never tried to send them questions, trying to recognize who they are and what they will be interested in talking about. So thank you so much for sharing that, Reese. Any final words?
Yeah, just to kind of respond to what you just said, I think that that's a problem that a lot of people have is getting those internal experts to actually want to write for you is so hard. And I won't say like, again, I'm very lucky that I have two people on staff that it's part of their job to do that, but getting other people to champion. What I would say is a little bit of what I've done is that you need to get to know them as a person first. You need to understand what they're excited about because if you're just giving them assignments, of course they're never going to do it. They have no real motivation to write a blog article or write a social media post or answer a question on a forum if it's not part of their job. But if it's something they're already passionate about, then you're meeting them more where they are. So getting to know those internal experts and then also making yourself available as a coach. So I always tell people you do not have to be a writer to write for our blog, to write for the company. You just have to be willing to be coached and work with me. So I do a lot of ghostwriting. I do a lot of formatting for people. I do a lot of outlining for people. We even work with writers who don't write in English as their first language, and we translate and work with it from there so they can feel comfortable writing in their native language and sharing their ideas. So I think it's really just about figuring out what makes it exciting for your internal champions because you can't just say, hey, I need you to be an internal champion for this product. Like, that's ridiculous. Nobody really wants to be, unless you're in sales already, nobody really wants to sell a product. But if you talk about something you're actually passionate about in the process, it's different.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, final words from Race. Go talk to your internal champions. Of course, it's not their job description to come and start writing content. You are the content marketer, you are the marketer. And of course, usually when you talk to somebody and you have a rapport with them, it's easier to like influence them because at that point they are doing things for the relationship you have with them and not just like a job that they need to do. It was a very fun conversation, Race. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Maybe in about a year, when all of these programs you're establishing for Qase have started yielding positive results, we can talk again about it and maybe share some new lessons that you learned along the way.
Yeah, I'd love to be back.